What is up, everyone? This is your host, Eric Holtzman, and welcome to the Mindful Motion Podcast. All right, everybody. I'm here with Greg Mack, one of my mentors and teachers. How you doing, Greg?
Doing great, Eric. How are you doing?
Doing okay. Just getting the day going. End of the week, long week. But I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy. You're running two businesses, seeing clients. It can be a lot to do. So I appreciate you taking the hour to talk to us and give us some insights from your massive brain. So just a quick intro on Greg and what we're going to talk about. So Greg is a husband and a Navy veteran. He created the Muscle System Specialist program and also the Exercise Pro Education program, which I had went through. It's been an amazing adjunct to my thought process. He's also the owner of Physicians Fitness in Columbus, Ohio, where he helps people resolve difficult physical problems by improving their strength and motor control and ultimately restoring their muscle function and just being healthier. So I kind of wanted just to kickstart this with just kind of talking about, your background, your history, and your journey into the fitness industry.
Yeah, it's I don't know, an interesting story, I guess, for some, maybe not for others, but it probably started many moons ago when I was playing baseball and football as a kid, right? Always involved in sports, recreational sports, and being active, and swimming and cliff diving, all that stuff. Just loved using my body to have fun. And then was a undergrad in mechanical engineering at Ohio State University after I finished high school here in Columbus. I was also a certified scuba diver and was trying to figure out how I could kind of combine those two ideas. Was actually looking at commercial dive programs around the country. There really wasn't very many, actually. And I don't know if it was my father, someone suggested maybe I go talk to the Navy because they had a commercial dive program, obviously, diver program. And so I went to a local recruiter, talked to him, I was in college, I'm a mechanical engineering major and like diving, what do you got? And gave me a little test. I guess I scored very high on it or something. And he was probably recruiting as well for his quotas, I bet. But he said that the Navy has a nuclear engineering school called Navy Nuclear Power School. So I could finish my education there and they'd pay for it. And they also had, Navy SEALs and commercial diving and U.S. Navy scuba programs. So I thought, well, what the heck, I get paid. They pay for my school. I can get out of Columbus. Decided to sign a Navy contract and started working for, in the Navy. First couple of years, obviously, I'm in school. I graduate, their nuclear engineering program with an emphasis in mechanical engineering. Went to serve on board a fast attack nuclear submarine, USS Swordfish, out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Worked in their engineering department, operating the primary power plant and fixing it and making it run well as we chased people around the ocean and delivered Navy SEALs and picked them up and all that stuff. And along the way, I got certified, qualified as a Navy diver. Every submarine has 2 qualified Navy divers on board to do hull surveys and radiation sweeps. And I was a rescue swimmer, when we were on transit on surface, right, in case somebody fell over. So what was great about the Navy was they have very strong intramural sports programs. I mean, you name the sport and they got an intramural league for it. And so I was lucky, a bunch of guys on my command, we were all athletes and liked working out. And so I was always playing sports with them and working out and exercising on board. And actually one guy wrote Muscle and Fitness magazines. This was back in 1986. We called our gym the House of Steel. We're working out, in the power plant, doing dips between the lube oil pumps and stuff, So the Weeder thought that was very interesting, wrote a little article about us. And so, I've always been an exerciser. But when I got qualified as a diver, now I have to stay in shape professionally or I'll lose my qualification. I had to do runs and swims and push-ups and pull-ups and all that stuff, timed, certain number of reps, to stay qualified. And, I worked hard to earn that qualification, so I didn't want to lose it. So now I'm really very focused on, staying in the best shape I can. Plus, I'm in Hawaii at the time, and we're going out to Waimea Bay and Sunset Beach and body surfing and swimming in crazy conditions. So now I'm really working out and staying in shape. And what happened was, along the way, all arm branches have annual physical readiness requirements for personnel, where they have to run and do a push-up and sit-up or something, sit and reach. And the people that failed that were put into mandatory 3 times a week training until they could pass. And a lot of those folks didn't like exercise. They didn't want to do it, so they'd start asking me and my buddies, hey, what do we got to do here to get in shape? I don't want to show up at 6 a.m. 3 times a week any more than I have to. And so I started showing them what I did and what I knew and helping them. They started asking about protein shakes and desiccated liver tablets and weight belts and gloves. And I started ordering that with one of my buddies from the mainland. And next thing you know, I got an apartment full of nutritional products and supplements and weight belts and gloves, and I'm reselling. And I found I really kind of like that. It was kind of fun helping people. And I think that was probably the initial seed that got planted in me that, maybe I should consider this as a career. And when my contract was up, I didn't renew and decided to explore that. So that's kind of the beginnings of it.
Yeah, that's a great origin story. I mean, back then, personal training was probably in its infancy. It was not a common career path.
There were informally, yeah, that's right, Eric. In fact, that's what happened was I ended up getting a job at a local Nautilus fitness center, which is nothing but Nautilus, first and second generation equipment, if you believe it or not. And I started working there, and within probably a year of working there, American Council on Exercise had come out with their the first ever personal training certification. And so someone had told me about that. I can't remember who. So I ordered the book because there was a book they produced that kind of showed all the research they did that went into the certification, the knowledge factors and the behavioral factors. And I thought, oh, well, this looks good, because I wasn't sure. Should I go back to college? What should I do here? And so I decided to take that certification. Yeah, that was, by now we're probably 1990, 1991, something like that.
Yeah, it's come a long way, maybe for better or for worse. I'm not sure.
A mixed bag, right? So so it's, 1/2 dozen. We got a lot of work to do still, but definitely it's a much more matured profession.
Mm-hmm. More opportunities and different components to the career now. But, you're considered the definition guy amongst colleagues.
Yes, I like.
So could you define what exercise is from your perspective?
Well, interestingly enough, I was fortunate enough along the way in the various courses and programs that I got involved in to meet some people that were really smart, smarter than I. And you probably know some of these people, Charlie McMillan and Matt Bernier and Kevin Dunn, Jock Henry Taylor, right? Really smart guys, passionate. And we wanted to kind of come up with our own definition because we didn't really like the definitions that existed in the literature. And we didn't think they were scientific enough, I guess, in a sense. And so we define it pretty specifically. It's a specific bodily or mental exertion or the removal thereof, especially for the sake of training or improvement of health. So it's force, or what we would call demand or stimulus, applied or removed over some time interval to and or from within a sensory motor control system, the human system, that results in a sensory motor solution or response with the intention of making or maintaining a desired specific physiological change or change in state. And so we really wanted to cleave off the definition from activities of daily living, because so often, that's what we would hear from our clients, right? Are you exercising? And they'd say, well, I walked my dog yesterday. I do some gardening, right? I carried the laundry up from the basement, in their minds, they're thinking this is exercise. And we wanted to make a distinction there. And so we did. And it's been really impactful, really, in the way I think about what I do, because definitions are essentially the clarity of language, and we think in terms of language, right? So it's helped me a lot, and helps me help my clients understand the distinction between exercise activity, which is a constructed process of intentional change to try to get specific adaptations, versus just walking around. Now, this doesn't mean that just walking around or gardening or walking your dog, taking the stairs, don't impart some kind of physical benefit. They clearly can, but they don't necessarily drive an intentional change in the system. And the research is very clear, right? That intention, visualization, alters the internal configuration, neuroplasticity, right? So that's really what we wanted to do. Long answer to your question.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I don't expect anything less. The funny, I had an instance yesterday with a client who asked, she likes to run and stuff like this, and I asked her, "Are you doing anything for your feet or your calves?" And she's like, "Yeah, I run." Like, it kind of points to out what you're saying. It's like, yes, you're working your calves are sore, but is that really the type of change, type of movement or exercise that's going to change them in the way that will help you run better? Maybe not.
That's
kind of makes me think of that. But so another question for you, from your experience, what kinds of challenges do people face when entering the fitness industry as a consumer? The kind of general theme for this discussion is trying to just shed light on this like divide between the medical health space and exercise. And I thought this would be a nice place to start.
Yeah, I think it is a challenging time for the consumer to try to understand, what exercise is and what it's not, and what fitness means. I mean, there's clearly in my view, is an excessive focus on outward appearance. Now, not that looking your best isn't important. It is. I mean, everyone, I want to look good, right? You want to look healthy, but the emphasis on it is so distorting, and it sets impossible goals for many people. And so that's one challenge for people who are looking at or entering the fitness industry as a consumer, is they're just faced with these visual images of near perfection, right, of physical capabilities and aesthetic, and it's just ludicrous, really. On top of that, or next to that, is the emphasis that exercise is just all about calorie expenditure, and that it should be done in a way that burns as many calories as possible per second squared. And if you're not burning, 3,000 calories, a millisecond, then exercise is a waste of time, right? And this is another, thing in the consumer's mind, or what they're told, and this is related to the appearance thing. But there are also many confusing messages about what exercise is, how much exercise. Exercise is an athletic endeavor, right? You have to be an athlete to be an exerciser. So these are some real challenges for folks.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, the whole industry is saturated with, like you said, the 1%ers who are 5% body fat and giants. And then everyone looks at that and they think, well, I'm never going to be like that. So why even try? And then,
no, I remember. Yeah, I remember. As you know, I teach a selling interviewing course for exercise professionals. I was out in Northern California doing it for a group out there, and my wife came with me. It's kind of a little side trip, and it was a CrossFit facility. Nothing inherently wrong with CrossFit. It's a place to exercise. And they had big windows in the waiting area that you could see out into the exercise floor. And there were people in there swinging from gymnastics rings and cleaning, 2,500 pounds, and yelling and screaming. And my wife looked at that and she was in horror, kind of recoiled, like, if that's what exercise is, I want nothing to do with it. It just scared the crap out of her in that sense, right? And so this is a thing we've got to figure out, as an industry, to kind of tempt that down a little bit. It's too intimidating.
Yeah, 100%. And, we're in a sort of a crisis right now with the health of our country, in a sense, and the vast majority of people don't train, and this might be a big part of that.
No, it's scary.
I guess switching gears, thinking about rehab exercise. Sorry, I think I had a little glitch. My Wi-Fi kind of cut out. there is this division between regular traditional fitness and then rehab exercise. And I spoke about this a little bit yesterday, where people train as hard as they can and no thought about health, tend to get injured, then they go do the rehab to fix their injury, and then they train and they get injured, and it's just back and forth through these different types of exercise instead of trying to make it so they don't get hurt. But I guess, what kind of issues do you think exist within the rehab space for exercise?
Well, more and more, Eric, it's a philosophy of body issue. It's what practitioners think the body is, and that drives how they treat it, or not treat it. And the consumer also has a philosophy of body, what they think their body is, as a system, as a material, right? So you're made out of Play-Doh or silly putty, right? I just did a webinar on this last night. I'm going to start publishing some more on this, because in the vein of definition, I identified six, what I think are six of the predominant body views that are presented, and so that's one, probably the top tier. The next one is lack of individualization. Everything is so protocol driven and so prepackaged that the unique individual needs of the client are not being understood, let alone met.
What do you think would be necessary for this to change?
Well, you would think it would be education. Most likely the universities that are cranking out undergraduate and postgraduate degrees and medical licensed personnel. Because I ask, my entire private practice is based in this medical fitness paradigm, my whole career. And I'm asking doctors, we have clients who are doctors from a variety of disciplines. And I ask them, when you were in medical school, did you take a course or any work at all on a philosophy of body, what the body is? And how do you think about what the body is? No, none, zero. And we have undergraduate interns that come in. I ask them the same question. They have no clue what I'm even talking about, right? And so education will help for sure. And the realization that the perspective a practitioner has, the thing they filter everything through, is influencing all their decision making, how they interpret the subjective report of the client, and how they interpret how the client moves or doesn't move in some pre-constructed way that they think they're supposed to move, right? And so we just need a conversation about that. The predominant views now are what I call fabricism, which is the body's made out of putty or bread dough or something, and if you have a sensation you don't like, it needs to be rubbed, stretched, kneaded, rubber vibrating thumpers got to be put on it, right? Or functionalism, that the only way to exercise is standing up on your feet and trying to incorporate as many things as possible all at the same time, right? And so, yeah, these things need to be confronted and hashed out and talked about.
So maybe for people that don't have a background in this, when you say, hey, Greg, pushing into my muscle, rubbing it, vibrating, massage gun on it, it helps. It makes it feel better. So why not do that? What's the problem with that?
As far as the analgesic response of the body, usually very temporary. Sometimes it might last a week or two, maybe longer. But that's just a sensory change. And so we're going to get into my body view here shortly if we're not careful. But the human body's chock filled with what? Sensors. Lots of different kind of sensors that when you touch the body in any number of ways, a whole bunch of these sensors can discharge a lot of information into the spinal cord and eventually maybe get up to the brain, which can alter the electromagnetic field of the spinal cord regionally or locally, the polarity of these neurons. And then, that will alter the information that gets to the brain, and a new conclusion could be drawn, right? So if someone's in pain, I'm never going to say, hey, don't do anything, to remove that pain. That's crazy. I've been in pain before. And pain, again, is just a word describing a sensation that we don't like and elevating its status, right? Making it a real problem versus soreness or discomfort or tightness or restriction, right? These are other words that are used to describe various sensations. So, okay, that's fine. But, is it really changing the system and moving it in a direction that is adaptive enough so that the change lasts much longer, other than just a temporary sensory? It's not integrated into the motor system. And again, I'm a big fan of agency and ownership of the body. And if it constantly takes an external stimulus, like someone rubbing me to get the sensation to go away, I can't own that. That's not something I can own. I'll always have to require someone to rub it. And so that's one of my issues with some of these particular body views and approaches.
Got it. It's more about just having autonomy, to be able to make changes without relying on someone else, and that's sort of the consensus of what exercise can be.
Yeah, I mean,
That's empowering, if anything.
yeah, I mean, if you're sore, and you got injured, and you want to take Advil and ibuprofen or whatever for a couple of weeks to deal with that, okay. But if you got to take that stuff for decades on end, wait a second, what are we talking about now? So now we're talking about trade-offs here, and so you got to be careful about that stuff. A little bit more thought, I think, should be put into it.
100%. Not to mention the downside of taking ibuprofen for a long period of time.
Or getting rubbed with an elbow that's digging down to your periosteum and probably creating a bruise that you can't even see because it's so deep. So yeah, you just got to be careful with some of that stuff.
So why do you think it is that so many people that do exercise, whether it's fitness or rehab, don't seem to improve or are not getting the results they want?
Yeah, it speaks back to, one, the reality of our physiology, right? As living beings, we have homeostatic, regulatory, autonomic based subconscious and unconscious things going on that want to keep us the same. And it's a strong process. It doesn't really want to change, right? Every time I see you, you look the same to me. Right? You're not this morphing, changing Fantastic Four bendy guy that every time I see you, you're some new creature, right? You got new anatomy and new geometries. So homeostasis is so powerful that it really doesn't, the system doesn't really want to change very much. And so trying to change it requires some real focus, some real commitment to managing the stimulus and demand necessary for the system to go, okay, if you're going to do that regularly, then we're going to make a change here. But if not, it'll stay the same. And that's for unhealthy people as well. I'm amazed that even highly dysfunctional, unhealthy systems kind of want to stay that way. They don't really want to change that much. So I think there's a lack of individualization for one. This idea that everybody's the same and any number of any protocol or any order of exercise is great for everybody all the time, no matter what age, no matter what biological sex, no matter what injury history or diseases they have, right? It's just ludicrous. It's improperly dosed. It's either underdosed and they won't change, or it's overdosed. And like you said, people get hurt exercising, and this is the crazy thing, right? There's no consideration of injury or health history. I don't think there's nearly enough emphasis placed on the subjective experience of the exerciser during and after exercise. These are some of the things I think that contribute to what you're experiencing and seeing yourself.
Makes sense to me. I mean, so you mentioned injury history. How does that affect your thought process when working with a client? Like, what do these injuries do to the nervous system and the motor function?
Yeah, past injury history, Eric, is very, very important to me professionally. Even injuries from 20, 30, 50 years ago can leave their mark on the body system, even if they're asymptomatic at the local level. Because I see past injuries as a form of like a post-traumatic stress syndrome in the body system. it may or may not have a strong emotional component, like we tend to see post-traumatic stress in terms of its cognitive and psycho-emotional dynamic and the duress it puts on the system when someone is triggered based on an internally encoded, stored network of neurons that vibrate at their own frequency, and they're all hooked up together, and any stimulus triggers them to get set off, and now all of a sudden, you have the expression of post-traumatic stress syndrome. But I think there's a version of that for past injuries as well, and that these injuries can degrade the system or inform the system in a way that takes a little bit away from it. And so past injuries, very, very important.
So if someone sprained their ankle badly when they were 14, it healed, they don't feel symptoms there. You're saying that there can still be some residual effect somewhere else in the body, and it might not be so straightforward.
Correct. Yeah. So this is the problem with the philosophy of body called localism, where a local sensation or a local issue from a material geographic perspective means that the problem only occurred and is manifested in that local area. And this is patently untrue because if you get injured, your central nervous system knows about it. Your spinal cord knows about it. Your brain knows about it, which is not local to where you injured it. And your ankle's hooked up to your knee and your hip and your contralateral shoulder, and through this intense internal wiring that occurs, and so it's never local, and it may have affected the way information is generated and processed, edited, and revised, such that it may manifest in some other way. So I see this every day in my practice.
Yeah, it is mind blowing since you taught me some of this and to look out for it, and it is it's quite remarkable, honestly.
It's crazy.
Kind of lends to the next thing I was thinking about, something you brought into light for me, which is this term allostatic load or allostasis. Not heard really until I went through your program. Could you kind of explain what that is? And I think the injury history kind of ties into that a little bit.
Yeah. So again, this has been in the literature for many years. This idea that homeostasis as a process of maintaining a relatively central dynamic control over blood pressure and heart rate, right, and body temperature and things like this, respiration rate. But the system is dynamic and living and can respond to stimulus, which means the homeostatic process is challenged. It has to meet that demand and try to minimize its risk of injuring itself, right, when it meets this demand. So that's called allostasis, right? The manner or process by which the body responds to stressors in order to regain homeostasis. So you start running. What are we expecting to happen? Increased energy demand, muscle temperatures change, energy levels are changing, heart rate response goes up, right? That's an allostatic excursion, which hopefully should happen. I mean, heart rate variability is showing this, right? But when the running's over, what should happen? Well, you should go right back to your pretty typical normative Gaussian distributed resting heart rate and blood pressure and respiratory, right? Allostatic, load is, when you have a progressive increase of stressors or the accumulation of stressors, and especially chemical stressors, adrenaline and cortisol and other, neurotransmitters, and these things that mediate our stress response and promote adaptation in the aftermath of some acute stress, might not actually respond well anymore, especially if it's highly repetitive and recovery is not allowed, or it exceeds, homeostatic controls or material integrity, and now you're getting what people would call being stressed out, right? And so when you've built up over time, multiple stressors, chemical, psychological, thermal, material. Well, now you have a system, that isn't so great at coping anymore with stimulus and demand that's forcing homeostasis to try to react. or they can't return back to homeostatic state. I mean, this is why I think, the 1 minute post submaximal cardiovascular parameter might be one of the more important ones. Okay, it's great that your heart rate went up. Well, how quickly does it come down? Right? It should take hours and hours and hours, right? How much does it come down, right? And this is a rough field indicator of there's a problem in your cardiovascular, pulmonary, respiratory system somewhere if that's not, working too good. So yeah, this is very important. And again, it speaks to not only systemic dosing, but also local or regional dosing of stressors on the body, and how you assess what you choose to assess, how much assessment, and how much stimulus you're going to give and the dose of that. So yeah, really important idea.
Is this allostasis or someone's allostatic load changeable, and how would you go about maybe altering that?
Yeah, fortunately, it is. Most of the parameters, can be altered. I mean, we built a heuristic, to try to get a sense of that. We're not drawing blood because there are blood markers for many of these things. But I just wanted a field tool that would kind of help check me up, and give me a reference to say, ooh, I gotta be careful here because exercise is about risk mitigation as much as anything else. And do I need to be a little more conservative starting out? But yes, we can't do anything about injury history, but the number of sensations people have, that can get better. If they have inflammatory process going on, that can go away and get better. We do a bunch of qualitative motor checks, and those can get better, right? So yes, someone can unload their allostatic load.
Yeah, that heuristic has been very helpful. I guess, is there a way for someone in the practical setting to be able to determine if they're exceeding their, ability to adapt to a stress? And then if they are, other than just backing off, are there ways to maybe, I don't know, improve it from a consumer standpoint?
Yeah, it's pretty tough for the consumer, right? It's going to be a tough problem because they just might have an overall sense of they don't feel good, or they feel very fatigued more easily than they realize, or should fatigue, right? One flight of stairs and they're like, whew, man, what the heck? My legs feel like 200 pounds. What's happening here? They got to sit down for 5 minutes before they feel better, right? So there could be that general sense of that, let alone if you have sensations you don't like and you want to call them pain, and they're hanging around more than a few weeks, and they're hanging around for months and months, but you should not be blowing that off and just hoping that you can ignore it and go away. I mean, there's a reason why you have the sensory array, embedded throughout your body to tell you things about what's going on, right? So you shouldn't ignore that, but it'd be very tough. Now, you see your internist, your family doc, they're going to draw blood, they're going to look for inflammatory markers, right? They look at your A1C and a bunch of different things. And they can sort of tell you, oh boy, you got high cholesterol, you got high A1C, your blood pressure's too high, your resting heart rate, these are all indicators that, your system is stressed. It's not coping well. And we're going to have to figure out some ways, to help you cope better. And what's very amazing to me is this is the beauty of exercise as medicine in a very real and practical way. It's not just a cliche term. You're filled with an internal pharmaceutical lab, that your contracting muscles produce an amazing array of endocrine chemistry that is beneficial for the system. And so this is that dosing thing again. Our systems require some stress, because if we get no stress, we're very sick. But if we're too stressed, we're very sick, right? So there's this very unique and interesting dynamic in living systems that require some stress, but not too much. Figuring out what that is relative to the state of the system, that's tricky. That's what's hard. And that's what we try to do in the MSS course, right? Is to teach practitioners, ways to consider the system and its current state, so that you can figure out, how what's the minimum dose we need to make a change, not the maximum.
Yeah, that's it's so funny. It just reminds me of what had happened this week, on top of my back injury that I just had recently, which was mind blowing out of nowhere. But had my neck, I've had cervical fusion, and I was just doing a very moderate workout for my upper body, and terrible pain in my collarbone and neck. And instead of just like letting it brew for a while, I did some mild stuff again today just to help the recovery process, and it feels a ton better. But it just points out what you're saying. It's really tough to know sometimes when to stop or when to keep going. Even something that seems so small can still ignite a big inflammatory cascade of issues in your body. And I think a lot of people go through that and they think, this isn't good for me, I shouldn't do it anymore, right? But there's plenty in between of nothing and what you did, maybe something less, right? But this idea that it can help reduce stress in your system is certainly not talked about that much, I feel like.
Oh, and it's in the literature, right? I mean, you're seeing it come out more and more that active versus passive processes tend, not all the time. I mean, obviously, you break your arm, you shouldn't be doing arm curls with a broken arm. I mean, so there are clearly material issues and diseases, which is why exercise professionals need to be hooked up to the medical community, because they can find that stuff and let us know that's a tumor. Everything's got to stop. We got to figure this out. Okay, that's great. Or did the MRI? Nothing's broken. Nothing obviously torn. Let's go ahead and start to do some active recovery with this thing, right? So, that's a difficult and important responsibility for exercise professionals.
It's it's mind blowing though. Even the smartest, influential social figures out there, like Peter Attia, doctor, MD, surgeon, brilliant dude, but he talks about exercise a lot, and he very intelligently talks about it. But then every once in a while, there's just not really this discussion around dosing and progression, and everything is really just a lot all at once for people that might never even train. So there's definitely still a lot of growth that needs to happen within the understanding of exercise. And hopefully this is, the trend keeps going forward towards more nuanced thinking. But
again, I think, what you're up against there again is a kind of a philosophy of body and a philosophy of exercise. And it's a very strange thing. I mean, I went with one of my clients to their orthopedic surgeon who replaced their hip, and I wanted to go and ask some questions, as she was getting ready to, kind of be discharged. And, I do that a lot. I go with my clients to their medical appointments. I want to meet their doctors, ask some questions. And he was cool. This particular surgeon was great. He let me ask questions. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times I show up and they just look at me like, what are you doing here, right? But he was, very generous with his time and answered my questions. But I remember asking him about, the deep rotators in the hip, like the deep contractors, the, obturator, QF, piriformis, right? I mean, you're in there drilling bone and cutting stuff out, and how do you deal with these muscles in there? What happens to them? And I said, you cut them all? You cut them or what? He said, well, I cut the piriformis. He goes, but it doesn't have any proprioceptive value, so it's no big deal. And and you hear that and you're like, what? What did he mean by that? And so this is a perspective about the body and how that surgeon thinks about what these tissues are. And as if the piriformis is incidental. Right, so okay. Wow.
I guess we could just remove it from everybody. It doesn't serve a purpose.
Yeah, so it's tough. Yeah, so.
I'm interested to hear what you think about what people might not understand about pain. I mean, you talk to people on a daily basis probably about this. People come to you because they have a physical pain that they don't like. What do you feel is the common misunderstanding about it, and why people feel like it's so random sometimes?
Yeah, this is tough. I mean, I'm no hardcore researcher in this area. I mean, I read the research as much as I can. I read the books. Butler and Mosley and, Melchak and Wall looking at this years ago. So I read this stuff because I got to deal with it as an exercise professional, really, whether I like it or not, right? This is where we find ourselves. And so, I'm right now, based on what I read and what these incredibly brilliant neurophysiologists and researchers are saying about it, is that, in my version, pain is an English word used to describe a sensation someone doesn't like and elevate that sensation to a high level problem status. That's what pain is. So now we're talking about a sensation, and a sensation is, the result of, the entire perceptual apparatus of this body system, all of its sensory apparatus, how it contextualizes things cognitively and emotionally, right, and frames things in certain ways. And so to me, it looks like an information problem or opportunity, right? Could be both or either, right? So it's a problem of information. And for whatever reason, the central nervous system, the brain, and then, what I'm seeing is the pain is a whole brain event, which means it's probably a whole spinal cord event, which means it's probably a whole body event. I'm someone who says that intelligence is distributed through the body system, but ultimately you need a brain to make some conclusions about some of these things, right? And that for whatever reason, the brain has concluded with its current state of information, we're going to have to call this pain. Okay, right? Now, again, it's easy to know why someone might say that, like that famous scene in Will Ferrell when he's Ricky Bobby and he stabs himself in the leg, right, in the wheelchair, right, because he doesn't think he can feel his legs, and he feels his leg. He stuck a knife in his leg, and that's why it hurts. So we know that, right? But it is that weird stuff where you just wake up one day and you're like, what is wrong with my right side of my rib cage, man? Like, what is going on? Now, it could be any number of things. Your gallbladder could be inflamed. You could have a irritable bowel syndrome. There's lots of things that could cause it. But if those things are ruled out, everyone's like shrugging their shoulders, like, I have no idea why you're having this sensation you don't like. It's an information problem, and that's where I think exercise as a stimulating event and process that gives us access to this array of sensors through the motor system. We can improve the quality of this information, because often it shows up as poor quality of movement in some way, and we can alter that. And I see it every day again, that exercise, not always, of course, but quite often can really change the information set and the quality of it. And the person says, oh, it doesn't hurt anymore. They still might have a disc problem. They still might have a foraminal stenosis. They still might have, what could be diagnosed as inflammation inside their joint capsule. But they're saying now, no pain. Wow.
Yeah, like you downloaded some new information, changed the output. It's so fun to see when that happens. It seems now more than ever, posture is talked about. Clients always come in, they say they have terrible posture. I'm looking at them, I'm like, your posture looks fine. I don't know what you mean by terrible. I think people have this like notion of what posture should look like. They deviate from that in any way, they have bad posture. And from a professional standpoint, people are using posture more and more in their assessments. What's the deal with posture? What is it about? And should we even care about it?
Oh boy. See, you're going to get me talking about, this body view stuff, right? Again, it has to do with definitions, right? Posture just generally means what? Gross macro body orientation, of which there's an infinite number of, by the way, given the sheer number of degrees of freedom we have. But it's about standing posture primarily, right? And so in the webinar I just did, and the papers, I'm going to start publishing more on this. I call it posturism, which is this notion that standing posture is the focus, and the belief is that somehow how someone orients themselves when standing indicates any number of problems, or is the cause of any number of sensations people don't like. It references this idealized normative standard against a vertical plumb line, and how the body should fit against that, and where the right and left side should be relative to each other. The problem is how an individual orients themselves in a gravity field under conditions is a highly dynamic process. There is a confluence of both voluntary choices and involuntary internal actions going on to keep someone in a standing orientation. And interpreting that by visual observation and reaching some conclusion about it is a bit daunting and I think overrated. Structures, emotions, external conditions, expectations can all influence an individual's posture at any point in time, right? And so to use, the relatively static standing posture as some kind of baseline reference for any number of reasons why somebody has sensations they don't like, I think it's highly problematic, Erica. Kendall and Kendall did a lot of work on this, right? Trying to see if, could they blame non-normative posture. And according to what I read, again, Charlie McMillan has done some great work and research in this area. Nope, sorry. It's too unpredictable. And there's just no way to say, because your right shoulder appears higher than your left, which could just mean your left shoulder's lower than your right, which could mean they're both in the wrong orientation and you don't know what orientation they actually should be in relative to each other. It just gets a little crazy. I mean, I know, Yonda many years ago with upper cross and lower cross and trying to blame, muscle tonus and tension patterns and to explain why someone's holding their musculoskeletal system the way they are. Yeah, I'm just pretty skeptical. Now, does that mean you shouldn't worry about posture? Posture, someone's posture can give away insight into their emotional state. Someone who's sad, has a certain posture. Someone who's happy might have a certain posture. Someone who's very centrally fatigued, they might be, assume a certain posture, which might indicate something. But I think the danger is just assuming some certain posture orientation means something very absolutely specific, and that what it is and what to do about it. That's pretty crazy to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think just having you articulate that for people would be helpful because it's not usually talked about in that way. There was this concept another one that you brought up to me that I was fascinated by, never heard before as well, which is this whole bioconfigurationalism idea. And I guess, can you explain what that is? And then if what it is helpful, how would someone who is a consumer might utilize that concept in their own training?
Yeah. It emerges from my base body view, right? And it specifies the idea of, that our biomotor control output, as the expression of a living human system in 4 dimensions, if you want to include the 3 cardinal and time on top of that. And that moment to moment, the neurological, chemical, and material arrangements at any observed point in time for any observed output is unique for that moment in time. And then the next moment in time, it's probably changing, right? And you see this in the literature where, someone's looking at a 10 repetition set of elbow flexion with the radial ulnar joint supinated, right? And I went and defined what a petition was because it didn't make sense to me that we would call the first one a repetition because nothing was repeated. It was the first one. The next 9 were repeated, but are they really repeated, right? Socrates talked about this in Plato about, walking through a river and every time you do it, it's different molecules of water, right? And it's never the same exact thing. And so I'm saying, yes, that's correct. Just because, someone's in an orientation that you're observing doesn't mean the things that we can't see going on are in the exact same orientation to hold them there. And that makes sense, right? By the second you think the second repetition or the first repetition of the petition is exactly the same as the first? No. The ninth, well, of course not. You have fatigue, right? You have energetic changes. The chemistry's changing, right? So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff changing. So configurations can change moment to moment. The question is, based on that, how many unique combinations of individual component behavior are necessary to aggregate to an observed event? And so we're talking about variability, and that apparently there's to a limit, right? Because we don't need every single configuration. So the system prunes things it doesn't necessarily need, but the more we're able to configure ourselves, the more robust and capable we are, which is the idea underlying functionalism, and that's fine. But there's some problems with focusing on that too much. So that we can produce unique outputs to meet dynamic conditions that we've never even experienced before, right? And so this is an important feature of a living, robust system that can move around, in 4 dimensions. And so neuroplasticity and new configurations and pruning others changes the internal configuration, let alone, the geometries of our body changing moment to moment. And this was always curious to me, that how somebody can generate just a kinematic action like hip abduction lying on your back, right? So they do hip abduction. And you can test that or measure the force output at whatever degree, whatever angle you want, and, get some, statistical, center for that. And then they lie face down and you do it and it's totally different. And they lie on their side and lift up their hip and it's totally different, right? Even though the action of the hip joint's pretty close to the same, just from a kinematic joint thing, if you're watching that. But what the internal system has to do to pull that off, totally different in each one of those. And so this is why it's important for people to explore motion and periodically change things up a little bit, right? So that you can acquire access to different parts and ways that you move, so that when you do find yourself in uncertain situations that you've never been in before, you have the resources to react.
Yeah, that's something I see with clients all the time. They're super solid and really good in one place, and then do the same thing in a different way, and all of a sudden everything just changes. They can't do it anymore, and now we have a new problem to sort out, and that could be related to different link tension relationships in the tissues. It could just be a nervous system coordination orchestration thing, and sifting out what it is
just being oriented. Just being oriented in gravity changes the way the brain has to figure out what to do.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it comes back once they figure it out. It's time they get it, but sometimes it doesn't. And it gives you something else to work on.
Yeah,
kind of an endless stew of different opportunities to make the system better.
Yes.
So I'm really interested to see your take on your opinion of what would it take to, create this new paradigm of exercise where the medical industry and the fitness industry work together, and there's sort of this back and forth, and we're just looking out for the best for our clients. Like, what do you think it would take to get to that point?
Well, I don't know. It's a tough one. People would have to set their egos aside. Be tough. It's tough to set the ego aside. When you have a for-profit interest or a career interest in a particular way of thinking, you don't always want people telling you that there's other ways to think about it. There might be some problems there, right? You don't want to hear about this, and so I think it just takes things like you're doing, podcasts, communicating, getting a diverse set of inputs, and using scientific methodology to help. I think we need more qualitative studies as well. The actual human experience side of it needs to be included a whole lot more than just a hard measure it, give it a number in units. Is the only way to explain anything, right? Not that that's bad. It's just not the only way to create a frame of reference and context for somebody. But yeah, just talking about it more and exploring it some more together, and finding out what really works and what's not working. And if it's not working, then discard it as soon as possible. Don't hang on to it as a sunk cost, just because you've got a lot invested in it, right?
Yeah.
It's not taking you in the right direction anymore. Time to bail. It's irrational to honor a sunk cost.
Yeah, that's I can just see how that is tricky. Obviously, I just went through something like that. Not going to talk about it right now, but yeah, that's a tricky business. We're talking about humans with emotions and investments and all these sunk costs that come with changing your path. It's a tricky business.
Hard for me. I'm not immune from it by any means. I struggle with that as well. You get locked into a certain way of thinking, and you think you're being, exploratory and open-minded, and probably not. Probably not. This is why peer review is, such an important idea, within just this, scientific community, right? Have some other people that aren't emotionally involved check out what you're doing, see what you're doing, right? And they may point out some things, and say, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah, that's growth mindset is helpful, and just keeping your ego in check is always a good piece of advice. Well, we barely got even through a third of some of the things I'd like to ask you. I think maybe in the future we could do this again if you're open to it. But just in case trainers are listening to this, or other professionals that might be interested in what you offer, where can people find you?
Obviously go to the website for the educational stuff, www.exerciseproed.com, no dots or dashes or anything. And, if you want to see what I'm doing locally in my practice, we've got a website, Physicians Fitness, www.physiciansfitness.com. Again, no apostrophes or dots or dashes. Facebook, we've got, a Facebook page. We've got a LinkedIn page. We've got an Instagram page, Exercise Pro Ed. We try to post stuff there. The social media monster constantly needs to be fed, which is a lot of pressure, so we're trying to produce some content to put out there. But yeah, that's what I'd recommend, if you're an exercise professional, and, go to the website. We got 2 real simple things that you can download to get a sense of where we're coming from. There's a free download that you can, check out. I think the one we have posted now is on motor control and proprioception, and that'll give you some insights into how we're thinking about that particular subject. And we have the Exercise Professionals Club, where we've got, conversations on video and PDF files and all these topics. So that would really give you a deeper dive into, at least our perspective on a lot of these topics. So.
Okay. Yeah. And just so people know, now you're doing your specialist program online too. So if you don't live in the area, it's more reasonable. You can still get in. So highly recommend it. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for taking the time to do this. And hopefully we can do it again in the future soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. That was a lot of fun. I appreciate you.
All right. You have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon.
See you, man.